Hello everybody, welcome back. So I need to crack on and get this compost sorted out. It's a job I've been putting off because it's hard work digging and shoveling and sieving and all that. So going to be a bit of noise today because the builders it's a weekday and they are working over there. The ground workers are doing the moving soil about and putting drains in, stuff like that. But I think what I'm going to do is start with this pile here because there's not a lot in that one, and what I need to do is get all of my potato buckets filled up with compost ready for planting potatoes next month. March, where are we? Yeah, March. And whatever's left, because there's all these piles at the end here as well that all need sorting out as well. So there's 4 piles there, pile behind me. Get the potato buckets filled up with sieved compost, and then the rest will get put on the beds. I don't worry about sieving it too much on the beds because I can just pull things out, large pieces, as I plant things and what have you. Then in that pile there, when that's empty, anything that isn't decomposed properly will build a new pile in there, and I'll show you how I do that, how I build my compost heaps. So any brown material and green material in the garden lying around or that comes out of those heaps will build a new pile in there. And I've got all those coffee grounds as well in those bags, which is that's a green material. So we've got a lot to do, and I better crack on. Of course, the frame I made for my sieve, the folding frame, is there behind all that timber and the water butt. So that's the first problem of the day. All these boards are out of the house. They're the old floorboards, some of which have got to go back in, but not many. So these will be useful for, I don't know, edges to the beds, raised beds, all sorts of stuff. Get cut up for firewood. I never throw anything away. Recycle, lower your carbon footprint. If you didn't see the video that I did last night, I'll put a link, all about recycling materials and what they want us to do to lower our carbon footprint when we're growing vegetables. There it is. Right, so I've got to remember how to set this up now. I think that was a geranium. I don't know much about flowers, so do geraniums come back the next year? Or is that dead? Let me know. Onions. I don't think they're going to do much, but they are growing. They're putting new leaves out, so I wonder if I planted them. I might plant them somewhere and just see what happens. So that's looking pretty good. That's been there most of the summer, and it's a mixture of all kinds of garden waste, kitchen waste, coffee grounds, you name it, it's all in there. There's some shreddings in there, like tree bark, things like that, and a garden glove which didn't compost. Oh well, it's not one of mine, that must be one of Julie's. So what I need to do now is set up the old sieve, and we'll get shoveling and see what comes out of it. Okay, so I've got the old homemade compost sieve set up. It took me a bit of a while to remember how to do it. If you want to know how I made this, I'll put a link to that video, because it certainly does take some of the back work out of sieving compost, especially if you've only got one of those little round garden sieves. So my choice of tool for shoveling compost is a manure fork, mainly because it's got a long handle, and being tall it saves me having to bend over so much, and as long as the compost isn't really dry, it sticks together quite nicely on the floor. So I'm going to grab that, and then we're going to start sieving some of this compost and see what it's like. So because the end of that sieve is open-ended, as long as you keep the sieve slightly downhill, as you're getting towards the end of the sieving, all the big stuff will start to fall out the end into a bucket, which can then be put back into compost. So start a little bit like this, and then as you start to get the pile down in the sieve, start tilting it that way, and all the stuff will come out, all the big stuff that won't go through the sieve. Comes out at the end is this nice fine compost. Got some red worms in there, that's good sign. And this compost will have gone cold a long time ago, and the worms have just got in there and carried on breaking it down. And that's the one thing that I always do, is I don't put a concrete base or slabs at the bottom of my compost piles. They're always on the earth, because that makes it much easier for worms and bacteria, etc., from the soil to get into the compost heap and start helping to break it down. There's the odd stick that gets through somehow, but nothing major. So I'm only going to do this sieving for my pots, my potatoes, and any other pots that I need. The other compost that I dig out will just go straight onto the beds, and I'll just pull out any big sticks and stuff. The waste from this will go back into the compost piles at some point to continue breaking down. But that's not bad, and this is 100% homemade compost, and it's probably been going 9 months, something like that. Lovely. Oh, so this is taking a bit longer than I thought. I don't think I'm going to get all these piles done today. I've got some office work I've got to do this afternoon, so because probably my job is I go out on site for a few days, and then I have massive amounts of paperwork to do. But I'll carry on till lunchtime. The compost is sticking. It's quite wet, so it's clogging a little bit in the sieve, which is taking a bit longer. But never mind, if I can get that pile done today and get as many pots filled as I can, there's actually a lot more compost there than I thought, even though it's compressed so much. Once I start sieving it, there's a lot more there than I thought there was, so we'll have to see how many buckets I get done. But when it comes to compost, I don't get too precious about it. I tend to try and put it together in layers. If I can get enough material together, then I'll build the heap in one go, which is the best way of doing it if you can, because by layering brown and green, the compost heap will then heat up if you can do it all in one go, and it will break down a lot quicker, and the heat will kill any pests and weed seeds, things like that that are in the compost, if you can get it hot enough. So the sort of things that I put in there are obviously garden waste, so vegetables that are no good, leaves, etc., and kitchen waste, so anything that comes out of the kitchen that hasn't been cooked. Now, you can put cooked food on the compost heap. It doesn't do anything bad to the compost, but it might attract rats and other pests, so that is a downside of doing it, but there's no reason that you can't do it. I try to always start the heaps with a good layer of brown material, quite coarse material, so sticks and bark and wood chip, things like that, because that it gives a layer of browns at the bottom which are against the soil, but it also allows air in at the bottom, because there's going to be air gaps between the sticks and things. It will allow air in at the bottom, and air is one of the components that you need for the compost breaking down cycle. Then I would put a layer of greens and a layer of browns and a layer of greens, and depending on the material I've got, I would try and make those layers about 3 to 4 inches thick each time. So when I cut the grass, for example, that's normally a full collector on the lawnmower. By the time I've spread it out in a metre square bin or something, that's around 3 inches thick. So other things that I put in there, tea bags go in there. Just check your tea bags don't have plastic in them. Some do, but it should tell you that on the box. Leaves, if you've got dead leaves, save the leaves, get them in there as a layer of browns, they're fantastic. If you've got enough leaves, and you can fill a builder's bag or something with them and just close it up and let it turn to leaf mould, that's brilliant. If not, add it to your compost as a brown layer. Shreddings are good, so if, like I've got the old Christmas tree up there from this year or last year, that'll go through the shredder, that'll get put in as browns once it's died back a bit. I even put big lumps of bark in mine. Now they won't rot away in the first year or anything like that, so you'll end up pulling those out, put them in the next compost pile. What else? I put little landai hedge trimmings in mine, and as a green. They do take a long time to rot down, and they will go through 2 or 3 compost heaps until they've disappeared, but you know, that's fine. What else? Oh, coffee grounds. Well, as you see, I have a lot of coffee grounds, and they're green, so they go in as a layer of green. Weeds I put in. I don't worry about putting weeds in there. As long as the pile gets hot, it will kill the weeds and any seeds as well. Now, you don't have to make a hot pile, because to make a compost pile get hot, it has to be a minimum really of about a cubic metre. So not everybody has that ability to do that, space to do that, or even enough material to do that. So you can buy the little Dalek plastic compost bins, and you can have what's called a cold pile, and you just keep adding stuff to it, and that will rot down. It takes a bit longer because it isn't getting hot and you haven't got the heat, and it won't probably kill the weed seeds and any pests either, but you still got some good compost at the end of it. And if you leave the soil open at the bottom of the bin, then the worms can get in there and break the stuff down as well. You need to keep it damp, not wet. It needs to be damp. So in the height of the summer, give it a watering with a watering can or something, just to make sure it's damp in the middle. And very often, if your heap starts to cool down by watering it, that will help it heat up again. You need air and heat really, and the right ingredients. So like I say, I try to do roughly a 50-50 mix of brown and greens. There are people that go much more in depth into this, into the science of it, and they know exactly what the ratio should be between green and browns and nitrogens and carbons and all of that. But I tend to just do a roughly 50-50 mix in layers. And then once that heap is full, I'll cover it with some plastic, keep it moist, leave it for 2 or 3 months, and then turn the heap. So basically just pull it all out and put it all back in and mix it all up again. Or like with the heaps, the bays that I've got at the end of the garden, I'll turn one into the next one, and that quite often re-energizes the heap, puts a lot of air into it, because as the heap sits there for a couple of months, it sinks, and it's sinking because it's breaking down and rotting and composting, but it's also sinking just under its own weight, and that pushes all of the air out of the heap. So by turning it and mixing it up again, you're fluffing it up, you're putting air back in, and that quite often will re-energise the heap. So a good thing to get yourself is a soil thermometer. I'll show you later in the video, but it's just a long prong with a dial on the end as a thermometer, and they normally have different colours on there, so you know, red for hot, obviously green for okay, and probably just a white dial if it's not up to composting temperature. They're quite handy just to keep an eye on the heat to see how it's getting on, and if you need to turn it or water it. So I don't think composting is an exact science unless you've got the ability to measure things accurately and know exactly what carbon's in something or nitrogen's in something. And for me, it's just about making compost for the veg plot. So, but already I think I've filled 3 of those buckets. They're 40 litre pots. So if I was buying that compost at the price I was buying compost at last year, that's a saving of about £17 already. So alright, it's a bit of hard work, digging it, sieving it, etc. But at the end of the day, I might have saved myself 100 quid just in compost. And by having a compost heap, it's somewhere to put all of your garden waste, your grass cuttings, your hedge cuttings, and your shredding that you do, the weeds, etc. So it's not costing you anything at the end of the day, and it will probably be far better than any compost that you can buy. And if you're careful and you're not putting things in there that have got weed killer on them, then it will be chemical free as well, where a lot of the shop bought composts now do have elements of chemicals in them, weed killers in them, and then that kills your crops. And that's why I have a policy that the only compost that goes onto the beds of the garden itself are compost that I've already grown in, if it's shop bought. So if I bought compost and I've grown in it and the plant did well, then I'm happy to pour that pot onto the garden as a conditioner, a soil conditioner for the coming year. If I buy a bag of compost at the shop, I now have a policy that I won't use that unless it's in a pot. So I'll use it in a pot because that isolates the problem. If there's a weed killer in it, I haven't spread it over my garden, and then if that plant does well, that compost can then go onto the beds. My homemade compost I will happily sprinkle on the beds because I know what's in it. I know that we don't use any weed killers here. I know if I've fertilised the grass, and I know that I won't put those cuttings into the compost for 6 weeks afterwards until that's grown through. So yeah, you just got to be a bit careful with shop bought compost. I had some tomato plants and cucumber plants last year. They're in pots that I used shop bought compost for, and some of them just wilted and died for no reason. They had light, they had warmth, they were watered the same as everything else, but these particular, I think there was 2 or 3 pots, just died. They just wilted up and died. That was it. And it could only have been something in the compost itself. Okay guys, well I've carried on, but it is getting really wet now. The further I go down that pile, the stickier it's becoming, which is making it clump up. It's not really going through the sieve properly, so we'll call it a day there and let that pile dry out a bit, and hopefully we won't have any rain for a few days. And with a bit of evaporation and the wind getting on it, it might dry it a little bit. I can get the rest of that sieved. So I've got about 3 buckets worth done, and probably the waste material, the stuff that's too big, although some of that will be because it's clumping and it's not going through the sieve, but there's about 4 buckets gone into that end bay on top of the stuff that still needs to rot down. So I think that's what I'm going to do, is any waste from here goes into that one, and then those 3 will have to get sorted out another day. So there we go, compost sieving. Didn't quite go to plan, but never mind. There's always another day, and there is still another month until I need to start even thinking about putting the potatoes in. So thank you very much for watching. Hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, please hit the thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed already, please do, and follow us on our journey to become more self-sufficient. Cheers.